Advisory Work Group being held on July 19th, 2023 at 3 p.m. I will now open this meeting with some information for the work group. The Risk Modeling Advisory Work Group will be following the open meeting requirements of Bagley-Keene. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Members of the public can't comment on an agenda following member discussion, but we ask that you limit your time. For items not on the agenda, the public will have an opportunity to address the group, but you are asked to limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you are filling in for a committee member, please answer for the person you are filling in for and state your first and last name. I will now start with roll call. Jim McDougall.
Here.
Carlos Camarena. Deborah Hobblestadt.
Here.
Neil Matuka. Paul Glushku. Max Mortiz. Nancy Watkins.
Here.
Dave Winokur.
I'm here.
Robert Marshall. Anthony Powers.
Here.
Yana Velichovic.
Good afternoon.
Chris Ochoa.
I'm here, and I also have my colleague Nick Camerata joining.
Thank you. Dory Beats. Carrie Woodrow.
Here.
Joe Irvin. And Melissa Semser.
Here.
Quorum is 9 people, 50 plus 1. We have 9 people. Quorum is established. We will now move on to agenda review, and a motion will be required.
Nancy Watkins.
Very
So,
Go ahead, Nancy.
sorry.
Nancy, you made him.
Yeah, I was making a motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second Melissa Semser.
Thank you, Melissa. There's been a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, is there a motion to approve the last minutes?
Nancy Watkins, so moved.
Chris Ochoa will second.
Thank you, Chris. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the past minutes. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of adoption of the past minutes signify by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Very good. Motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Okay, I've been looking through the document, and those many of you have had a chance, some of you, to get in there and look at the document, or at least comments. I don't know who all was looking at it, but there are definitely some comments. I've noticed a few specific areas where there are comments. So as last time, since Dave did a lot of the editing on the document, I will turn it over to him to work down through those sections, and we will try to get those fine things, few items tidied up. We know there's a piece that got left off. Yana, excuse me, in answer to your point, especially at the end of the document, so we'll make sure we get those added back in as well. But Dave?
Great, thank you. Sorry, thanks, Jim. So for the rest of the group, coming out of what we talked about at the last meeting, I tried to put back in the things that the consensus was around, putting them back in. Yana and I spent some time coming to consensus on the mitigations that matter section, and I think the new version is faithful to the intent of what we were initially trying to put in as it and lend itself to the overall flow, but with some additional context and perspective. from Jana's background. And then the executive summary was put back in its original form with, I don't believe, any edits. And there are a couple of questions that were raised, and we'll get to some of those where Nancy's once we get a little bit farther down. A couple of questions about things that were previously, that were included in the first draft that are not included in the current draft that may still be linked to the executive summary. So I would suggest, as we did before, that we come back to the executive summary after we walk through the various sections of the draft to identify if there's any discussion points. And then Nancy's raised a couple of points for things that were removed that there should be more discussion around whether or not they would be appropriate to put back in and they add to the product we're producing here. And then Melissa has a couple of comments about work having to do with utility modeling that when we get to it, I think with some discussion, and if there's consensus around it, it will make sense to put those, a brief reference to those under other models being used in other perils, where I think it aligns with what we're doing here. So if we could scroll down. Nancy, you have a comment here that anything you'd like to add on that comment?
Well, just it said something about we weren't including the financial effects, which, you know, we had a vote last time about the use of catastrophe models that did go all the way to the dollar effect of losses. But we also discussed in the group to make it clear that although we are going not only to physical risk, but also to the financial cost associated with physical risk, that we were not addressing the issue of catastrophe models and insurance pricing. So I just amended the sentence to read according to that discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Any other discussion? I think obviously I don't want to speak for Deborah and for CDI, but I think the concerns, if that's the right word for it, were correct. That the pricing of insurance, et cetera, is beyond the scope of this group and is CDI's purview, not CAL FIRE's.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with this edit. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can we scroll down, please? Just as we're scrolling down, for those of you who are not also on the mitigations work group, I'd really suggest taking the time to listen to the presentation provided by NIST on their latest report on the campfire. It was truly remarkable stuff. And as they acknowledge, none of us are going to read all 600 pages of the report, but the presentation was phenomenal. I've watched it twice now. I keep taking more notes. Melissa, anything you'd like to add about or explain about utility corridors here?
I mean, again, this is just me trying to get in where I think it makes sense to acknowledge the work that's happening with the utilities and the risk that they cause. You know, that it's the community level risk is dictated in part by the presence of utility assets, whether they're hardened or not. So it's not just the surrounding parcels, it's also the utility assets there as well.
So if I could just, this is continuing conversation from last time, and I'm open to that there could be, that I may not be in the majority on this opinion. But from my perspective, there are almost no times here where we talk about risk associated with ignition reduction, and that most of our conversations about risk and mitigations are associated with hardening of homes and reducing contiguous fuels capable of rapidly transmitting fire. So if there's consensus of the group, I could go either way. My only concern is that when we insert mitigations and discussion of risk that are associated with ignitions here or associated with utilities, is there other work we should be doing to ensure we're discussing risk reduction in the form of ignition reduction from other means, such as, you know, campfires, dragging chains, burn bans, et cetera, that currently is not in the document, where we're mostly talking about risk with the form of fuel capable of transmitting fire.
Yeah, Dave, this is Jim. I think to your point, I agree 100%. I've read this one here a couple times. And I just wanted to see, Melissa, if this was what maybe your intent was. By adding utility corridors here, that's adding them to me in this section would be like adding them as part of the risk to evaluate, saying not only is it the surrounding parcel in the open space, but the utilities that are within this community should be assessed as part of the risk. And then as you read further in that, it says collective action at the community scale is required in order to be truly effective, meaning we need to mitigate those utilities that could be have a risk as we're mitigating and doing the stuff in the home hardening area or whatever within the community. So kind of including the utility mitigations as part of the community strategy. Is that what you were trying to kind of get across here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two sides, and it looks like Yana has her hand up too. I mean, there's two sides of it. Obviously, there's the risk to the utility assets themselves of a wildfire, and then there's the fact that the presence of a utility asset isn't in itself a risk to the community. I kind of, I get what Dave is saying about there's all sorts of other risks. It's just that this is the presence of a utility asset can increase markedly what you would a risk score that you would assign to a community. So it in and of itself becomes, something you have to factor in. Perhaps I'm still not quite seeing it the way Dave is seeing it. Maybe it's nuanced. So Yana, I know you had something to say too, but.
Well, I think what's interesting when you look at the document, there's a couple places where we talk about infrastructure, other types of infrastructure, and protection around those other types of infrastructure. And I guess I need to look back at our charter and our original plea to see if we should be just sort of talking about those more generally. I mean, they're key elements of our landscape. They both create risk and are of risk. So maybe we just pull that out and call it like what it is, and that we're mostly talking about homes, but there's another landscape of issues that is in that critical infrastructure piece that is worth some mentioning.
But could you, Yana, just to clarify though, because I do think there's exactly like Melissa was saying, there's critical infrastructure to be protected, just like homes and people, right? Lives, property, critical infrastructure. But there's also the risk of ignition, and be helpful. I think right now we're, at least the way this is reading it, as opposed to risk, as in the risk of ignition. So the proximity of a utility infrastructure represents an additional risk. But that's only a risk of ignition, not of fire transmission. And my only concern is if we're calling out one of the many risks of ignition, right? There's many roadside ignitions every year. So is it proximity to a roadway, et cetera? I'm worried about opening up an entirely new door. I have no concerns about including utility infrastructure as critical infrastructure to be protected, but I am a little concerned about utility infrastructure as a source of risk, since we're not calling out the others.
Right, like we're not calling out campgrounds, we're not calling out roadways.
Yeah, and I'll remove it. I don't think that utility. I mean, I get that you could say that they're on par. Just say, well, a campfire can cause it an ignition as well. But I don't think they're an apples to apples comparison, given the amount of resources the state is putting into trying to solve one particular type of ignition. So, I'll remove it. I'm not sure I'm ever going to fully get 100% to where you are, Dave and Jim, but I don't see it as the same as every other ignition source out there, and it doesn't seem that the state does either, given the amount of resources that are being spent to try to resolve this particular risk to communities. And I guess what I keep trying to get across is that the presence of the utility asset itself increases the risk of a community when you do risk modeling.
Is that true though? I don't know, but do the models incorporate proximity to a utility asset?
Certainly all the, certainly all the modeling that's happening in utility world do. And,
Yeah, for sure.
the ignition risk to a community and the consequence is obviously the presence of a hardened or non-hardened asset, but I'll let it go. I'll pull it out.
Well, I'm not, Nancy, do you know if they, or I don't think Max is on here, but is that calculated, or do you know if that's used in a risk assessment? What the utility, those utility corridors, if they're hardened or not? I think that's kind of the question here, because in some ways I think it fits here a little bit, but there is that balance, like Dave says. But if we're calling it, if we're going to say there's utilities here and that's a risk that needs to be analyzed just as an adjacent parcel or an open space, I think that's a little bit different of a conversation. That now we're saying that you have utilities present in your community, you might have higher risks than another one if they're not buried underground or something, right? So Nancy, do you or somebody in the modeling world know if that's a factor?
Well, I don't know if Max is on. I guess in this context, it looks to me that all we're saying is why mitigation is hard, which is different than whether models typically reflect these risks or not. And I'd say if this is a contribution to why mitigation is hard, then it's not, doesn't seem inappropriate to put it on the list. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have it in a model. It doesn't mean that community action is going to be addressing utility corridors. I mean, I'm really not the expert on what we would put into community mitigation. I think the models are going to really pick up as much physical information as they can. And if we gave them better information, they might be able to pick it up in the future, even if they don't pick it up in the current. Not sure if that really answers your question, though.
Yeah.
And it does a little,
yeah. Perhaps I could just add one piece and then we can move on. But to what Nancy just said, I think maybe the point that I've been not getting across very well is that perhaps these models should, they should be leveraging all the work the utilities are doing to understand the risk to a community of having an unhardened utility asset. And the utility risk models do all of this and rank their circuits and rank the possibility of if this particular asset in this particular location causes an ignition, the impact that's going to have. And that's also been another conversation that's gone on is that community levels. I mean, if the community does all of the hardening in the world, but doesn't in any way acknowledge or interface with the utility, and that utility doesn't harden, that community has still very significant risk on the system. I mean, they face significant risk. And it's one of the places we've pushed the utilities as well is that they need to be working with communities so that communities aren't doing their own community wildfire mitigation plans, doing their own hardening and acting completely separate from what is essentially part of the community, which is the utility assets. So, I've been trying to figure out kind of where best to get this in. If this isn't the right place, that's fine. I won't hang on this particular one. I think it's an important part of truly understanding a community risk.
I'm sorry, Melissa, I know you've been very gracious about saying we can move on, but I do want to make sure we get to the bottom of this, which is, from my perspective, if a community has created fuel break splats, et cetera, they've disrupted the pathways leading into the community, they've done home hardening and defensible space at scale, then a proximity to a utility asset that could be a source of ignition beyond that area, that's no different than the other source of ignition. And that in a fire-prone, fire-dependent landscape like the West, there are going to be fires. That's simply a statement of fact. And in some ways, this is Kate Dargan's line, not mine. But Kate makes a pretty compelling point that we should, in fact, be encouraging all the fire we can right now, because in 2040, it's going to be a lot worse. The conditions are going to be a lot worse. And any fires any landscape we protect from fire now that bill's going to come due when it's potentially going to be hotter and drier 30 years from now. Which provocative point, but I think it's to me, it speaks to a truism that there is going to be fire. And so reducing sources of ignition is worthwhile. But what we're focused here on is things that are agnostic of ignitions. And now that said, I think there could be maybe a third path where we say, add a sentence here. I'll shape one in a second, put it in the chat, along the lines of, because the point being made by the bullet is that, and this I think we all have slapped the table on, that if you're on a 1 acre or smaller lot and you do everything any expert has ever told you to do short of building your house exclusively out of cast concrete, you are still going to have residual risk as a result of conditions on parcels beyond your property lines. And that no matter what you do, if everyone around you hasn't done these things, you're potentially going to be exposed to destructive wildfire that exceeds what you could do on your parcel. And when we get into ignition reduction, that feels like a slightly different point. And then and perhaps could be wrapped in to something about presence of sources of ignition to include utilities. But the root of my concern there is I personally believe, and I may be alone on this, but I personally believe anything that gives our residents a sense of security that we're going to either reduce ignitions to get rid of the wildfire problem, or we're going to increase the firefighting force to get rid of the wildfire problem, gives everybody an out on the need to create defensible space and do home hardening retrofits. Because from my perspective, in a fire dependent landscape such as this one, fire is inevitable. And if we have more firefighters, that just means we put off the bill longer. And if we have fewer sources of ignition, that means the fires will occur less frequently, but they will still occur. And when they occur, it's the presence or absence of mitigations, which is what I took most of our press here to be about, versus ignition reduction as a mitigation.
Yeah, don't disagree with you on that. I mean, the fire adaptive, we need the fire. I don't have any disagreement on that. I guess my question is what happens when a utility asset runs right through the community? So maybe you've hardened around the community, but there's still ignition. And maybe the answer is that every home has to be perfectly hardened. I don't know. That's why I'm willing to let this one go. I think I see it a little slightly differently, but not enough to belabor the point.
Yeah, but let me I'll do a little tinkering on the side. Melissa, I'll send you a note offline. That last point you made really resonated with me about the proximity. Anyway, proximity, potential for ignition with. Anyway, let me do a little tinkering. I'll send you a note about what might be a way to capture that thought.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Yana, I think you're up on this one.
I can't see that on the screen. It's too small for me.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so your note says, can we make this a stronger statement? It is the conclusion of our executive summary, and what's highlighted is the last sentence. In order for this to be effective, the results of mitigation efforts must be measured in a way that is transparent to communities and consumable by risk models.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess just the high level comments, I think there's some words missing and polishing to kind of be done throughout. And I guess the wrap up for me on an executive summary really should be, here's where it all comes down to. And this is sort of more of a carve out and a caveat. And so I think I was looking for a stronger statement around how we want to wrap up the executive summary, since we talked earlier about the executive summary being where most people are going to focus.
Okay, I would presume there's no objections to that from the. So at the risk of turning that around, Yana, is there any chance you could take a crack at what you the sort of the language you think would flesh out that concluding statement?
Sure, and I kind of think we need to just make sure we've got the main context settled out, and some of those overall sort of big ideas worked out. I mean, I think writing by committee is always a little challenging in general. And I think we've got some tone issues to still think about in general and kind of where we want to land on. I think when I read the report overall, there's a lot of this is hard and this is hard and this is hard. And whether we want to turn those statements into this is hard, but this is what we think we can do statements might be a point for consideration in general, so that our intended audience has some action items that they can take away with more than here's the existing difficulties, limitations, and challenges.
Okay, I totally agree. Can we roll through, Celeste? Yes. To Melissa's question, for those who can't read it, is do you mean to say percentage of all ignitions caused by anthropogenic sources is 97%? Yes, in Mediterranean counties, 97% of fires are started by people. If there's a better way to say it, certainly we could tinker around with that.
Yeah, I think
Isn't that
the
a,
way. I was just trying to write it a different way because it was a little unclear.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the section in particular was edited quite a bit. Well, I'll clean that up. All right. I have no objection. So there's a suggested change of protecting properties and lives from reducing eventual losses from wildfire. I assume there's no objections to that.
I don't see
Yeah,
any.
that's a great one, Yana. I dare someone to disagree with that objection. That change. Yeah, I love it.
Not touching that one. No.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and Dave, in this whole section, I know, I had to teach last week and my life was just super consumed with something else. I think there's a bunch of things in here that you and I can just kind of keep working through. I don't know if we need the whole group to sort of philosophically get into each of the wordsmith edits. They're all in the general spirit. It's really just in formatting and layout. I think there's still a little more work to just make sure we're consistent in how we do things. There's a few places where we wander a little bit and a few places where maybe we get off a little bit into the weeds around how much detail to give. And, so there's, I think, some editorial commenting and some things that you and I could work out.
Okay. For the rest of the group in this section, any concerns? For whatever it's worth, for everyone else, when Yana and I got together, I don't know, we were on the phone for an hour and we spent about 50 minutes in mutual admiration of all the ways that we agree on the problem. We spent about 10 minutes actually talking about the language used in the report. All right, if we could scroll down, please. All right. Yeah, was there any objection to that piece? This has to do with, can you scroll up just a hair, please, as we can see what the lead into this was?
Yeah, we had a conversation about this last time, and we had agreed to cut it.
Okay, great. So if we could do a strike through there, Celeste, that'd be great. And I do think while we're deleting there, this is regularly pointed out that from Jim and his team being charged with executing a single set of regulations in a state as diverse and as large as this one, that is really a tall order. I would remind everybody, though, that the vast majority of homes are in fire districts or municipalities, which under PRC 4117 clearly have the authority to adopt local amendments. Okay, if we could scroll down, please. Okay, I think these are all pretty minor. Yana, anything here that significant?
No, I just really think what I noticed is in the mitigations that matter, we went into a whole lot of detail in the first zone without putting a lot of context, and then we got more succinct as we went through. And so I was trying to go back to reframe it so it had more of a consistent flow and it was more predictable to the reader. I think it still needs a little work, so I moved a few things around just to get there, and that's the kind of stuff where I think you and I can talk it through and make sure we're good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any other conversation here before we roll through?
For Melissa's too, though, I noticed I was kind of picked up on that one too. We want to just stay consistent with work group. I think we've swapped it a couple times in the document. I just want, maybe as when we get towards the final, we should just kind of go through and make sure if their word committee is updated with work group in general, but that's a further down the road edit, but yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Ayana, I did notice, I thought it was in this section. I thought, so where you put a new diagram, were you looking to add? You've edited it since I looked at it because I was on a meeting.
Well, I know. I just moved it. I moved it up is what I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. But were
I
you
just-
looking
it
at
felt like-
another diagram?
No, I just moved
Or
it,
you
moved it
just
up.
moved the diagram?
I just moved the
Okay.
diagram up.
Gotcha.
That's all.
Okay. I got you.
And I
Okay.
fixed the other one that we had talked about fixing some language on. That had happened earlier.
Gotcha.
Okay, unless there's any objections or discussion, Yana and I'll take this section, but I think just thematically, does anyone have any concerns about the way we broke them out following the SSD methodology? At least to me, that's critically important because it's fundamentally different as far as the value of defensible space if there are not other structures near you, or if there are, and that's the methodology established in 2207.
Yeah, and I would kind of have a question for the group on this section, Dave, just to make, I want to feel comfortable, everybody, is we're getting the point across enough. We mentioned the IBHS, we mentioned the NIST. I just want to make sure that we're being strong enough about the mitigations. We're not listing out like, here's 45 mitigations you need to do, right? I think referencing those documents with the research is important. But do we as a group feel that that's strong enough in the mitigations that matter section? If you do, I'm good with it. I just wanted to make sure everybody thought it was strong enough.
Well, I think you've got a good point there, Jim. I think there's a lot of places where we sort of understand the terms but don't necessarily define them that well. And I think whoever does the final editing should really read it for people that are not used to our vocabulary. And I know we've got a glossary on it, but I think in the comments that you're referencing, I mean, Dave, you talked about a network effect of wildfire. Well, that seems a little jargony for someone who's not in this space. And I think the majority of people that will read this are not people that have had a lot of experience here. So just pulling it back a little bit, being clear, defining those. Maybe we can use some call out boxes. We can use some other ways to sort of insert in context and text ways to describe what we mean.
Okay. Yeah, I was just kind of looking at it from a lay reader, like, are they really getting what we're trying to tell them? I mean, I love how it's set up. I just want to make sure it's strong enough to say, this is where it's really at, right? These are the mitigations that matter. So that's all I had.
All right, thank you, Jim. Could we scroll down, please? Deborah, you have a comment on
Yeah,
models versus barriers?
yeah. So this was what I think goes back to what Yana said earlier, that we have a lot of language in here in the document about what's hard and what's a barrier. And the title of this is why are models needed to measure wildfire risk? And then we spent much of the time talking about how difficult it is. And so I'm wondering if there, it's possible to sort of reframe that a little bit, or add some language that talks about more specifically why they're needed, and move some of the barrier language elsewhere. I don't feel strongly about this. It was just as I was reading through it, it seemed after a while to be like, this is we're repeating a lot. This is a very hard problem.
Nancy, I see your hands up.
Yeah. The first paragraph explained why models were needed to measure wildfire risk, but it got deleted. Essentially, it's saying that there's lots of different kinds of events. Some of them happen over and over again, and you can just look at historical data, and that tells you everything you need to know. Certain catastrophic events or perils like hurricanes, wildfires, floods don't fit that description. They're infrequent. The limited historical record doesn't represent the full range of possible events. And climate change makes that even more more true, that the history of the events doesn't represent all of the possible things that could happen. So that's the lead in, but somebody deleted it. I believe
Well,
that
I
it
think
would help
actually-
a lot to explain why models were needed. I was okay with what information. The question is, like, if you want to change the title, we could change the title, but the point is that just why are we modeling scenarios that could happen that haven't happened before? And that's what this is trying to answer.
So I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think we're only looking at modeling into the future. I think that we've got, we talk about all the different types of models that are available to us. Some of them are looking back, some are looking forward, some are incorporating both. And so I think the reason that that other paragraph came out is because it was really focused on CAT modeling. And I think we have included language around CAT modeling, but I don't think this document is exclusive to CAT modeling. And so I think, what we need to be focused on for the legislation is, we have a charge of 6 things. We have to identify mitigation measures to determine risk. We have to think about cost-effective ways to gather data on mitigation factors. We have to discuss how parcels can affect the risk of other parcels, evaluate the effectiveness of nature-based solutions, review other jurisdictions' applicable wildfire risk models, and identify barriers to determining wildfire risk in a community and specific parcels. And so we may not even need this whole section, like why are models needed to measure wildfire risk? It's, potentially provides valuable background. It doesn't necessarily answer the charge of the legislation, but the conversation here, if we have a whole section on barriers to models, we may want to move some of this that's in here down to the barriers so that we're not getting, so that we're addressing the questions in the legislation and not getting sort of mixed up with the challenges, and then if we don't offer opportunities to address those challenges.
Okay. I mean, for various reasons, I was all right with deleting the word catastrophe model and changing it to risk model in lots and lots of different places in this report. I thought it was weird, but didn't rob the report of like substance. To start now taking out why they were asking us to, why the word wildfire risk research models is in the legislation. So we're giving background information on why models are important and trying to explain to the layperson why we got here in this first place. Now, is it hard? Yeah, it is. I mean, I guess we can try to be more constructive about barriers, but I think, why did we get asked about the use of models as opposed to just, I don't know, whatever kind of data we already have about, well, let's look at the dollar value of mitigations as they have occurred everywhere in history, and we don't need a model at all. We'll just take an average. Like, nobody asked us to do that kind of research. They asked us to comment on models and how they can be used to understand wildfire risk and use it for mitigation. To me, this is like 100% relevant. It got a little less clear once someone deleted the first paragraph.
You done, Nancy? Anthony has his hand up.
Just I guess a comment. I kind of agree with both of you on a different levels, but from the perspective of, fire suppression, models are super important. And I think I think this whole work group, by design was to kind of explore all of these different tools. And like, to me, models, fire behavior models, weather updates, things like, I look at all those as a type of model and tools for information. When you look at like risk models developing, I said this in the beginning, it's just another tool for a risk management process, right? So another tool that's useful for firefighters, or another tool that's useful for the public or anybody else that's able to look at the intent of what we were set out to accomplish. I believe in the beginning of all of this was like, yeah, let's make a model that's very fluid and can adjust over time based on the current fire regime, and have, something that's kind of good for everybody. That if an insurance company needs to pull this specific type of model for their risk based on community location, frequency of fire, intensity of fire, lack of fire, therefore of fire history, all these different little inputs of data could be put in there to help to spit out a percentage sliding scale of risk. And then we provide them the tools that would be useful for them in this document with the mitigations that matter to help lower that risk. And so without the understanding of what that model is actually intended for, then it's just more information that people are going to graze over and not take as something that would be a very integral part of them, implementing mitigations to lower the risk.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Deborah?
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't explain why models are needed. I'm totally fine with the discussion of why models are important and useful. I did disagree with the language that was included previously. And I think there were a bunch of questions that came in from folks about like, why are we breaking into different pieces historical models and CAP models, and like, why are we, there were many comments on the last version. So that section can be rewritten. To this, I mean, this 4.1 can be rewritten to discuss sort of what Anthony was just touching on and what Nancy has touched on. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't. The only thing I was flagging here is that I think that it probably is an important discussion to have, but the discussion that's included is more focused on the barriers as currently written.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Deborah, if I could just jump in. So I put in the chat what was there before. I think your point's well made, Deborah, that why models are needed to measure wildfire risk is an important and useful conversation, and that this, especially when by the time we got to editing, it got chopped up. Would it make it, Celeste, could you scroll down just so we can see the header on 4.2, please? Right, so would it make sense then to have a 4.1 that explains why wildfire models are useful and needed? I think the key element in the deleted language really had to do with catastrophic events occur so infrequently that the historical record does not represent the full range of possible events, especially with climate change, that the future is going to be different than the past. And so some conversation about why models are needed is 4.1, then 4.2 could call, or maybe at the maybe 4.4 after history and types, could call out the discussion that's currently in 4.1 about many of the challenges mostly having to do with data availability and uncertainty, particularly as we go forward, as things get more dynamic, and that we could get the why they're needed, then an explanation of them, a discussion of the different types, and then some caveats about what barriers or why they're hard. to help manage expectations. I'll just say I'm particularly sensitive to this one because I'm regularly confronted by residents of the district who are certain that I have a crystal ball in my office that spits out, these exquisite models that can tell down to the pound how many tons per day need to be removed from the district to reduce our wildfire risk. And then they're all very surprised when I tell them that would probably be $1 million undertaking on a go-forward basis. And there's such a disconnect between people's understanding of how hard this stuff is and how hard it actually is that I do think it would be helpful to talk about that. But are there any objections to that methodology? Try to address Deborah's concern about the header does not exactly match what's included below now. We could break out a hey, this is a need for models, and then these are the different types of models. This is the history of models, and these are some of either the barriers or challenges of utilizing models.
Yeah, I think if we move some of the text that goes down lower in the second paragraph up to the higher, but essentially, how do you understand it? You take some events that already happened and decompose them into pieces, and then try to reconstruct how all the pieces fit together. So that's kind of a colloquial way of saying what they're doing. And so maybe if we can try to get that point across, that it's trying to explain not only what happened and how what were the outcomes, but how did it happen, and what were the contributors. So there's probably a better way to word it, but if that's the point that we're getting at, would that help?
Yeah, that's what I got out of it. Is anybody, Dave? I think that's pretty much endeavor. I think that gets where you want to be, right? Yeah. Anybody else? Go, Anthony. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the other thing to include is, and I think this is just like plagued, especially the fire service, is like we focus so much on our failures and we never really highlight our successes, because that's just a part of like the culture. It's part of the job. You go, you get it done, and you might have your specific AARs with like your after action reviews or whatever, your incident debrief with like your own collaborative forces. But when something goes right, and when you look at it as a model, like just as an example, like look at those communities that have become fire adaptive and have had fire encroach into their communities, and celebrate that success and utilize them as examples. Maybe it doesn't fit into this model side of things, but there are really good fire adaptive communities that have survived, within my career, where it's like, wow, these guys did their work. We came in, we felt safe, we were able to engage and get the job done. And, fire could have cruised through their community potentially without us even being there. But at the same time, it was like, it made it really easy for us to go in there and do our jobs. And that's the educational side of things, and to highlight those successes instead of just, because this report does kind of focus on a lot of hurdles and challenges and the things that are hard, but not impossible to achieve, right? And so if we can somehow highlight those things, it might empower some other communities to get involved and do it.
Appreciate that. Mark, I got your comment. I think that's a great key point to lead off on the why models are used to measure risk in the chat.
Yeah, that was good. Oh, Celeste, I think we lost the document.
I was just trying not to make anyone seasick while I was trying to update your numbers
The
in there.
numbers.
So I was trying to fix some numbers and not make anyone sick. So just to confirm though, just at the top up here, we're going to add a 4.1 section, and it's going to lead off with that paragraph that may or may not be reworked that was out of the original document. And there'll be a new header given to it. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. I've got
Okay.
for notes here, I'll play around a little bit, but 4.1, why models are needed, 4.2, history or development of models, 4.3, types, 4.4, challenges, or some derivative of that.
Okay. I'm just trying to get some of this in here for you so that it's a little bit more.
I got my stack of sticky notes. It's gonna all be fine.
So the this paragraph, though, the broadly speaking, methods of evaluating property insurance risk can be divided into historical models and catastrophe models. Like, I don't think that's where we need to start, right?
No, it's just in there, so she just put it in there so it can be edited on. It's not staying there. So unless you added that back in, right, just because they put it in the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I-
it's just
I
there
thought-
and then people can
Yeah.
go in and edit it and clean it and do whatever they need to
Yeah,
do. It's
and-
just a jumping
and-
point.
Deborah, to your point, if that's what I may have been on a previous version that I cut from. Yeah, so if you look at what I put in the section or in the chat, it actually says, broadly speaking, methods evaluate the risk of property loss can be, so not the insurance. I don't know where that insurance element just came from. That may have been an older version coming back
I think
into
you
life.
grabbed the wrong one, Celeste.
But yeah, if you look at the chat, property loss, not insurance.
Grab the one out of the chat, Celeste.
That's the one I'm looking for right now. Just give me a second here.
Okay.
So the one that came directly from the chat was broadly speak. Maybe we had an updated version. Okay, I just grabbed the one from the first version. So let's do this.
There we go.
That came directly from the chat.
Yeah, so we would redirect it not be looking at property insurance and to be looking more at conditions and representing events, like a range of possible events, and what are the underlying conditions and how would the events change if the conditions change. There was a good comment from Mark in the chat.
Yeah. That's what I have on my notes. I think, Dave, that's what you have, right? Okay.
And then there were notes from Max that I think got copied in here somewhere. Yeah, I think Max had this comment about, I'm confused, concerned that the historical catastrophe distinction is not that useful. We don't always follow that categorization in the writing below, and many models built on historical data, e.g. my lab, actually integrate the historical frequency of extreme events into the mix. So I feel like this paragraph is going to need a fair amount of work to capture, all of the comments that had concerns about the content previously. So I'm fine including a reason like why models are important, but I think that even the current language may not address all of these questions.
Okay, thanks. Anybody got any more discussion around this? I think we have direction of how to work it over and bring back to the group. Okay. You already moved down to the last trend. I think the next one, yeah, that's the next one.
So yeah, this comment had to do with the change in wording, which, like, if climate change is contributing to novel wildfire conditions and consequences previously unobserved in historical records, then what the original language said is that you need to go beyond past events. Like, it's not sufficient just to base your prediction in the future based on what you've seen in the past. You have to model change. And so you have to expect that the future will not look like the past. It has to do with a concept called non-stationarity, but we didn't want to put that in there. So we used a different way of describing that you can't just use the past to predict the future. So that's not the same as less accurate. It means you need to do something different than just use the past. So I think the way that it was worded was pretty accurate and pretty clear. I don't remember if there was some reason cited for the change. So I suggest we just go back to the way it was. I mean, we're still in the section of why models are needed, and that's what this is about.
I don't have any concerns with that. I don't know. I don't know where the change came from, but
it's been hacked on pretty hard, right? I guess my only question to it, Nancy, is do you think novel is the right word? I don't know, maybe they're not. I don't know. I get in these words sometimes. It's like,
Oh
it's
yeah,
kind of like,
it's a little Jane Austen, isn't it? Okay.
Outside the historical range.
Right. We'll find a synonym. Give me a second. Let's move on, and I'll find you a synonym and put it in the chat.
it's kind of like saying that the fires burn the world up, and people goes, it was unpredictable. Well, was it really? No. Yeah.
How about
unexpected?
Inconceivable? If you've watched The Princess Bride, you should know what I mean.
Yeah, inconceivable. Yeah, I don't know if it is though. I mean, to me, it's almost like the extreme wildfire conditions and consequences, right? I mean, to me, it's a little maybe more direct word, right? I don't like saying that the things we're seeing are novel. I think the things we're seeing are, if we can really model it, are pretty predictable, right? If we knew enough about the environment, but we don't, because Mother Nature is always better than we are. But I don't like saying they're not predictable sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. Unprecedented.
That's a good word too. Yeah, because we haven't seen them in the past. Yeah.
Or heretofore rare. I mean, it's rare. With some of these we might have actually experienced, but.
Well, I think I think we're coming up with things that are new. At least that when I've been on these calls and heard Jim and others talk about encountering things that they'd never seen in long careers. Sorry, Jim, not making you sound old here, but like all of a sudden everything's different, everything's new. That's what novel was supposed to say. Not just it was unusual and then it happened, but like, wow, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I like the word unprecedented. That's just me. I know I'm being picky on a word here, but I think I
love it. Fine with it. From an actuarial perspective, you didn't violate any standards.
All right, everybody's good on this one. No other comments? And then I got called old, so that's okay. Thanks. That's good. Dave's laughing. I'm the old guy. He knows. Yeah.
So this one, this is not one that I feel strongly about at all. It's just we have like a long discussion above about the distinctions between hazard and risk. I think it's always helpful to remind people if they haven't read that section carefully, if you want to have repetitive portion, but if we're trying to cut down on the length or whatever, some of this content was covered earlier. I do not feel strongly about this one way or the other.
Deborah, I would offer up having just again this morning have people explain to me how we need to do this work so CAL FIRE will change our hazard severity zone ratings. At least from my perspective, we cannot explain the difference between hazard and risk frequently enough. Yeah, true story, Jim. They wanted to know what we were doing to do the mitigations, and then they just literally looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language when I said that's not how it works.
Yeah. And I read this, Deborah, and went back and looked at the other one. I think this one, I think it's good to reiterate. I think this one's really good because it maybe gets a little more in depth about mitigation. So I was like, hey, it is here twice, but I'm like, it kind of fits where we're going in this piece. I thought that was just my opinion of it. So.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Going further down.
All right, and so Melissa, this, if you could do just a little explaining, I think would be helpful for the group to explain what the wildfire, the utility wildfire models are, and then we could figure out where to drop them in as a yet another version of probabilistic models that are currently in use.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if probabilistic models is, I mean, I guess that is where it goes. So there's a different models that they use. You know, they have the consequence models that are more on a, if an asset, like what are the conditions around it? If these conditions are in place, what is the likelihood? What is the type of damage or the consequence essentially that would come from this asset igniting in this place with these winds, with this, you know, this direction, that kind of thing. Then there's their operational models, which is of course how they're trying to make decisions on whether to shut off the grid, that take into account a lot of real-time data and try to understand and predict the spread of a wildfire at a particular time. You know, so to predict of like the coming week ahead or the coming day ahead or things like that. So they have a, you know, a wealth of data essentially that they've built here to understand, not really, I mean, of use to not just if the utility asset starts the ignition, but really if an ignition starts in this place under these conditions, what is the spread likely to be like? Again, right now limited mostly to the first 8 hours, but trying to go beyond that. So I think that, you know, I just think there's a treasure trove of information to be had and used in these models and leveraged in an overarching state risk model.
So what might be an artful solution, unless someone has an objection to it, was what if we create a section for models used by wildfire models used by utilities, and then you could drop in all of that stuff as a good way without trying to put it in the bin of whether it's a historical model or probabilistic. It sounds like it's all of the above. And then that could just be a nice standalone place. Yeah, so we could create its own bin, and then we could put in there what they're doing as a way to point. And I think your point's well made, which is if the utilities who are well funded and mandated and highly regulated, et cetera, if they have done stuff that would be, and I'm sure we've all experienced this with their fuel clearance stuff, they're doing great work, but they can't go 1 inch beyond the CPUC mandate, regardless of what kind of benefit it would have. And so we often, we ignore and they ignore, and they end up siloed. And so I think this would be a good opportunity to call out a bunch of good work that has been done by a player in this space, but it's not necessarily being integrated with everyone else's doing because of the CPUC mandates.
Yeah, Dave, I just add maybe, go ahead. Sorry, Melissa.
No, I was just gonna, I'm fine to have it as a separate section, and I would just drop in those sentences such that I put there.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe we push it down in section 6. It is by other jurisdictions, but maybe we could add a sub bullet like by utilities or something, right? Melissa, would you have a problem though if we took out the word TechnoSilva as the vendor?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I hesitated on whether to include it or not. It's just like they're dominating space. So they're all using TechnoSilva, which essentially de facto makes TechnoSilva models in this, you know, the ones that are dominating.
In
but
the
I'm
utility world,
in the
yeah.
utility
But we just try
space,
not
sorry,
to like point people
Understood.
towards, yeah, okay,
Yep, we can remove it.
thanks. I think we're getting through the big ones. Just to put it in the chat, just a reminder of folks that we want to wrap up a little bit for the end of 4:30, just so we can tidy up the rest of the agenda as well. But we'll keep moving.
All right, Celeste, if we could scroll down.
What was that, Dave? I'm sorry.
If you could scroll down, we got the integration with climate models. Looks like there's a number of comments right at the bottom of the screen.
So these are comments that, as I was working on the last version, I was sort of copying over the comments that people had made. So like Elia had suggested mentioning something. And so then I said, Elia, can you put in language that would conform with your suggestion? That's kind of all that was going on here because I
Okay.
didn't want to write for her.
Got it. Is she here today? I don't see her.
I don't believe she's a member of the work group. Was she representing somebody else?
So Neil Matsuka is a representative of the work group, and I'm not sure if he's here.
He's not here today. And
Okay.
I have not seen her name in any of the work group meetings or have
Great.
her as a member.
Let's show
She
them
just
as
had a bunch
result.
of comments in the last version. So I was trying
Okay.
to respond to it.
Okay. So I think just show those as resolved and we'll press on unless someone feels strongly.
I mean, we might want to share them with Neil just so that because I mean, those were all OPR statements and questions. And so, and you know, they had suggestions. And so I was sort of trying to reflect those suggestions so they didn't get lost. But if we
Yeah.
show them as resolved, then they'll get lost.
Yeah,
So
we'll
maybe
reach
you
out to
just send
Neil.
that to Neil.
Yeah, we'll reach out to Neil. Where are you going, Celeste?
Back where
I
we
think
were,
we're-
hold on.
Okay. I think we should be at section 8.
Section 8.
Yep. And Nancy has a comment there,
There we go.
down below that. There we go.
I think we skipped a few comments along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We just skipped some big ones here.
Yeah. Are we, do you
sorry
want
about
to
that.
go in order or do you want to,
Yeah, no, we need to get through those. I was in the wrong place too. So sorry, I went too
Okay,
far
let's see.
myself.
We're getting
So-
close to the end, everyone. I promise. Just hold on a little-
4.45, right? I think that's where we are. That
Yeah,
was
this is
below
where
the
we are.
stuff we just
Yeah.
discussed with Deborah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're at model evolution. There's a couple okay, so cat model uses. So I think we're in essentially what we were talking about in the section that got deleted was part of how okay, so I think this relates in the outline to model uses, wildfire risk research models from science, academia, and industry. And so we had a not very long paragraph that said, well, outside the insurance context, CAP models have been used increasingly by public and private entities attempting to understand physical risk in their decision making. For example, agencies determining municipal bond ratings, investors deciding where to allocate capital, government entities targeting regulation and funding towards areas of greater risk, et cetera. So it was a pretty, it was a short list, and then concluded as the demand for catastrophe models continues to expand, the models will continue to evolve to meet the demand and address the new use cases that arise. Essentially, like dealing with that bullet in the outline, and also kind of putting this whole modeling thing into context. It's not just an insurance thing. It's not just a, wildfire risk mitigation thing. Models are turning into a pretty standard decision-making tool for a lot of industry and government entities. So I didn't understand what was the rationale for not wanting that in there.
I'm trying to get there in my change document. So.
Nancy, would it be possible for you to drop that language in the chat so we can just see it? Because I don't know which version it was in, and I don't know where it is now.
Okay. I will use my multitasking document opening superpowers. That's Deborah, right?
That was me. Yep, Deborah.
And see if I can fulfill your wish. Okay, here we are. Chat. Ha.
Thank you.
Okay.
And in case you're going to ask me the same question for my next comment, I'm going to just go ahead and do the same thing again.
So you're so Nancy, so you're suggesting that the language that you just dropped into the chat be inserted in the after the second paragraph in 4.4.5, the CAT models?
Yeah, describing CAT models or what they're for or what
Yeah.
they're used for.
Yeah, right after the first paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, well, I guess didn't mean to assume that everybody was fine. Are others fine?
Any other discussion around that?
I think it's good because this is Anthony again. I think it's good because it just provides context behind for folks that don't understand like what a CAT model is. Like when you look at catastrophe model, that makes sense. But if someone in the industry just, you know, they just say CAT model, it's like, oh, what do you mean CAT model? Like, what is that? And it lines it out for the folks that might not understand the technology that's being utilized and how we get these, figures. So it kind of just lines it out in this document and gives them the context to feel confident that the right tools are being utilized.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we will move down to the next section.
It's I think we're back in another comment on model evolution, and once again, this was in the outline, and the reason for putting it in there is that well, two reasons. One is we are we're trying to give the reader a sense of where we are in model maturity. Models tend to get more, I guess, more accurate as time passes and usage increases. Kind of like more gets invested in producing them, and then there's more debugging as more people like find things that they want to do better. So we had a section about where we are and how models are changing just like right now. So it starts with the paragraph, more sophisticated models. Then I think that the first, the more sophisticated models paragraph just is talking about the current state of what models are starting to use. The second paragraph I see has some insurance and reinsurance stuff that we probably want to edit out, but the point is that hurricane models have been around for decades. Wildfire models have not, for the most part, but just what that means to be less mature and more mature. And does that mean you can't rely on a model or that it's wrong? The answer is no. What does it mean? Here's what it means. And so that's what I just put in the chat. I definitely see that, having the insurance reference may not be the greatest thing in the world, which we can edit it out. But the point, if you get rid of that part, I think the point is still good for this context. When you're talking about people are expecting magic out of models and then they get upset because they don't do everything, we thought this would be useful context, especially when we get into the next section, which has to do with how you deal with the challenges of less mature models, which is 4.5.1.
Okay, does anybody have any discussion around that, or we can get it dropped in there? I know we're running short on time. I think we definitely, to your point, Nancy, some of that stuff does need to come out of that, but the discussion of where the models are, does a group agree on that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this makes sense to me. I would like to have a chance to think about the exact language a little bit more, but I think, I don't have a problem conceptually with that. I think what I had said in my comment was that section 4.4.1 focuses on the challenges of, I can't even read my my thing there, it's so tiny. Focus on the challenges of less mature models across the board. So we should just make sure that we're not duplicating language, which doesn't look like we are, but.
Yeah, I think we've changed it around because that's static versus dynamic too now.
Yeah.
We changed some of the numbers too. So
Okay.
I think once we clean that up, it'll be easier for folks to review it.
Yeah, and it's possible this got copy pasted somewhere else, but I just saw it cut.
Okay. All right, I think we might have time to get to one more, hopefully. I think we don't really have too many with a lot of comments left in them, so. Deborah, this next one's yours.
Can you tell me what page we're on now? I'm so
Sorry,
lost.
Celeste has it on there. 34, I believe.
34. Yeah, 34. You guys can't see the screen that well?
It's small.
Oh,
What is?
Yeah, I'm just toggling back and forth between
Okay.
multiple documents and screens and whatever. So, okay, so 34. Oh, this is the one, what is a wildland probability index? This was actually a comment that I copied over from Melissa back in June. I think it's a good question, though. We might want to have like a footnote that explains what a wildland probability index is, or like this whole sentence about a wildland probability index with possible values ranging from 2 to 6 is relatively meaningless to someone who doesn't know what we're talking about. So maybe a little more detail there would be helpful.
Yeah, and I just put the link in the chat to the USGS Wildland Fire Potential Index, the WFPI, and that link takes you right to an explanation.
So maybe we can just copy the explanation. Yeah.
we have that reference too, right? Yeah, we have it referenced below, so, okay.
Yeah, it's just about that overarching thing, read that we need to give out the document to. I mean, really, we should, if we were doing our due diligence, we'd have somebody who doesn't work in this space read our document. Let us know whether they can
Absolutely.
understand it.
We may find some folks to read it, so. I'm sure we'll get plenty of feedback from the WMAC group that'll get a chance to look at it. So we'll have some people, although unfortunately, most of them are in this space. So maybe that's not the best group. We'll try to find somebody. Okay, we have about 8 minutes left. Other jurisdictions. Nancy, do you want to start on this? Do you think we can handle it, or do you want to wait till the next meeting? We have time to discuss it, or?
It's up to you. Let's see, my comment, is this the one, lessons learned from other states and perils? Yeah, it was written to be about how modeling and mitigation have driven down risk in other areas, with the first one being the California Earthquake Authority. I think on our outline, we have in the outline that we voted on in our March 20th meeting, we had a section called How Models Can Be Used to Drive Mitigation, Successful Lessons from Other States in Perils. So that was what this section was about. There was one example. I had actually done a rewrite of this at one point with a sort of don't talk about insurance pricing hat on. And I think I cut out Florida flood because it was more about insurance availability. But there's California earthquake, Florida hurricane, and then there's a section on the National Association of Insurance Commissioners and how they have founded a center of excellence for understanding for providing regulators with technical training and expertise regarding catastrophe models, and a catastrophe computer modeling handbook to provide regulatory guidance. So basically just where do you go when you look for examples of how catastrophe models are benefiting other states and perils? And what resources are out there? Because you know, what we're trying to do is demystify this whole black box idea and find the most relevant resources that lay people can go to.
Deborah, I see your hands up.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I think that I have a couple of responses. Number one is this is really focused on CAT modeling again, and I think we need to be mindful of not having this entire document become one about CAT modeling. I think that the perils are quite distinct. You know, when you talk about using the earthquake CAT modeling and the brace and bolt, so that can actually stabilize your own foundation, and your foundation doesn't affect your neighbor's foundation. I think that the types of mitigation that we would be looking at is quite distinct. Same with flood. You know, those are independent of one another. And I really think that a long discussion about other perils that are very different in their behavior and in their approach and the types of mitigation that you can take is not super informative here when we're supposed to be really focused on wildfire. I would also say there was a lot of discussion there about insurance provider solvency and how, you know, the CAT models will, you know, protect insurance provider solvency. I really think that's outside the scope. And I think we have enough to bite off with wildfire without starting to bring in hurricanes in Florida and earthquake, which are, like I said, just very, very distinct perils that you know, there could be some analogies, but we would have to draw them a little more carefully.
Yeah, did we have this discussion when this was put on the outline?
I was trying to pull that up too. Got about 3 minutes left, so I don't have the outline in front of me. got everything else open but that.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, yeah, there's really not a lot of good examples for wildfire of how other states are using models to drive down, or you know, to have mass mitigation. We put in the studies that we had, so that's why we looked to other perils as well. So,
I just want to push
yeah,
back a little bit on this idea that models drive mitigation, that models tell you your risk. They don't reduce your risk. Models simply don't reduce risk. They can inform you so that you can take steps to reduce your risk after the fact, but having a model is not going to result in reduced risk.
okay, I apologize for using shorthand while I was talking. It looks like we're pretty close to time.
Yeah, we are.
So maybe we could pick this up next time.
Yeah, Nancy, you want to send me the rewritten one piece?
I already did.
Okay, I'll have to dig
yeah.
through. I'll have to dig through my stuff. I'll
No,
find it. I got it.
I think I just cut out the Florida flood though. So, you know,
Okay.
I think it would be better to just hear from the group if lessons learned from other states in perils is worth having in or not. We had it on the outline. That's why the section was written. So if the group decides to change what we voted on for the outline, then there's not really a great reason to redo the section.
Okay. Well, we'll
So
start there.
I'll kind of defer to the group.
Yeah, we'll start there on the next meeting then.
Thank
Okay. Very good. Well, we got through a lot today. We are way down in here now, so that's great. Thanks, everyone. So roundtables, anybody have anything else? Yana, go ahead.
I guess I'm just a little bit confused. So we're basically in a holding pattern until next week, and no other work should be done, or what are we suggesting here?
We'll clean up the document just like we did last time and
Okay.
put it out. But, you know, I think we agreed on a lot of things, but let's pick up on the hard stuff next time and get those few. There's just a couple left and bang those out and then go back to where we already worked on this week and make sure everybody's good. I think we're getting really close. Dave, I see your hand.
Yeah, just so two things. So Melissa, I'm going to send you some notes on utility ignition about what we had in exec summary, and then you were going to take a look, Melissa, at adding utility models comments to section 6. And then Yana, if you could take a look at take another look at the mitigations that matter section, just on the sort of reviewing and that closing paragraph of the exec summary that we had talked about, and then I'll take a crack at section 4. Breaking it into why models are needed, history, types, and challenges, trying to move some of the existing content around so it makes more sense. If we can commit to getting that done prior to next week's discussion, I think that'll be a good progression that we could review that quickly, where we ought to, it sounds like we have a lot of consensus, and then we could continue the conversation from whatever page we're on now of the rest of the draft.
So will it come back to us in a version that we can edit then, for those of us that are got those assignments? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so those of you that have the edits, I'll add you to the Google document, and then you can go in and make edits just like we have been, and you can see everyone's comments here. So those of you that have been assigned work out, okay?
Okay. And then I guess just
Dave,
to, flag that I think we still need to really read it for jargon and tone and those kinds of things. So when we get to a polished document, I'm happy to put some time in that space.
Dave, do you want them to send those edits to you and then just do one document like we did last time? Okay, go ahead and make them in there.
No,
okay.
with this small group, if that small group can be given edit rights in the Google, I think that'll help out quite a bit.
Okay. And Deborah, so you got your hand up. We're a minute over. Go ahead.
Yeah, just is someone going to be assigned later to do the executive summary and the conclusion? Is that part of the cleanup that Yana was talking about?
We're still working through all the pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll work on that.
Okay.
I think we're trying to get all the context and then get the executive summary tidied up after that. So, right, Yana? I know that's where you were leaning. So, and Dave as well. So, okay. Anyone else? I think we've got clear direction.
Sorry, I just
I know that we've sent this out before, but like, do we have a target at this point for when we're trying to be done?
We are as soon as possible. I was asked that yesterday in the meeting, but we've got these topics that we've got to clean up and they understand that. And so we do have a meeting scheduled for the 26th, correct, Celeste? And so that'll be the next meeting. We will send out a doodle poll to schedule another few meetings out, hopefully to wrap this up.
Okay. I'll have to find a replacement for me then. So I turn into a pumpkin
Okay.
on August 4th.
So I gotcha. Okay.
Hey, Jim,
Okay,
this is
thanks.
Chris Ochoa. On that point, I just wanted to say, I think our ultimate goal, if we can pull it off, right, is to try to have this done by the next wildfire mitigation advisory meeting.
Yeah, good point, Chris. That's a couple meetings, depending on what people's schedules are. So if we
Sure.
can figure out with a doodle poll, we would like to try to get it, and that's in the middle of August. So that gives us 2 or 3 meetings. That would be ideal, but let's see what everybody's schedule is, and then we'll know better if we can meet that. So,
Sounds
thank
good.
you,
Thanks.
Chris.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Okay. Is there any public comment? I don't see any. Celeste, do you?
No, I don't see anybody.
Okay. As mentioned, the next meeting is on July 26th from 1 to 2:30. That will be virtual. And with that, a motion to adjourn.
Nancy Watkins, so moved.
Nancy, is there a second?
Chris Ochoa.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of adjournment, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? All right, thanks, everyone, appreciate it. Got a lot of good work done today, and we will see you back here on the 26th.
Bye, Jim. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
everyone.
all.
Bye.